Picture the 41st millennium, a nightmare of hive cities, holy machines, and gods that eat fear for breakfast. Now drop Gotham's dark night into it. No cosmic powers, no plot armor, just a man, his vow, and an arsenal built on discipline and terror. Could Batman keep his code where mercy is heresy and justice is a chainsword? This is the story of a detective in a universe that doesn't believe in detectives, only war. The sky tears like metal under a saw. One moment there is only night, the next a wound vomiting light, violet, green, and a color his eyes refuse to name. The craft he stole for a pursuit that never finished is grabbed like a toy by fingers he can't see. For a breathless instant, the cockpit fills with a sound like laughter played backward. Altitude warnings scream in a language he doesn't recognize. He rides the controls anyway, because that's what he does. He makes the fall as survivable as physics will allow. Impact isn't a crash so much as a surrender. The fuselage kisses a forest of pipes, peels, and folds. The nose grinds through wind that tastes like hot copper. Then silence. No sirens, no traffic. Just 100 million distant machines coughing in unison somewhere below. He unhooks with a motion that's habit, not thought, and drops into a world that smells like incense, oil, and old blood. It's not Gotham. That understanding arrives the way pain does, clean and undeniable. The gravity is a whisper heavier, enough to make the cape pull harder. Air pressure has a pulp to it. Even the darkness is different, textured by soot storms and the dull, patient glow of lumen strips strung along catwalks like veins. Above him, fog, then metal, then more fog. Somewhere far overhead, something hums so slowly he can feel it in his teeth. He catalogues. Catwalks of riveted plasteel, load-bearing columns fat with centuries of repainting, rails lacquered in grease the color of motor oil and funeral ash, 1,000 tiny offerings tied to pipes, bone charms, brass coins, little parchment strips baked stiff by heat, each stamped with a two-headed eagle. Graffiti etched with knives rather than sprayed, oaths, threats, prayers. The place is a hive, he decides, a city made vertical by cruelty and physics. He files the term under probable. Movement in his periphery, white ovals floating, candlelight caught in glass. No, skulls. Human skulls, hollowed and machine-gutted, suspended by purring rotors. The eye sockets are occupied by lenses. The jawbones clack, not from hunger, but from worn servos. They drift in lazy arcs, like carrion birds that never learn to tire. Their optics blink in patterns that are either language or madness. He fades into the shadow of a column, not because he believes the dead can see him, but because he never bets on what he doesn't yet understand. Footsteps, 3 sets, light on metal. Voices rattle up a stairwell like loose shells in a drum. Their language is a cousin to something Roman and something guttural, syllables chewed by bad teeth. He lets it wash over him until cadence becomes map. Stress falls at sentence ends. Names sit heavy in the middle. The tallest of the 3 carries an autogun that's mostly scrap, its stock bolted together from a table leg and faith. The smallest wears a coat made of someone else's work uniform, stained with magenta dye and slick with chemical sweat. The middle one has half a jaw of metal and half a face of keloid ridge. He jingles when he moves because keys and teeth hang from his belt. All of them wear icons around their necks, a double-headed bird, a skull, a fist-clutching thunder. gangers, he decides. Not military, not police, not amateurs either. They move like men who have spent a lifetime respecting blind corners. He watches them pass, counting heartbeats. When the last of them disappears, he slips after the echo. The first hours become a geometry exercise. The variables are angles, sounds, and the limits of the human body under unfamiliar weight. He tests the cape. Its plasteel mesh gusts in the smog like a metal flag, but still breaks his outline. The grapnel harpoon finds purchase in vents and rungs, metal that isn't quite the alloy he knows, but stubborn enough to hold. He maps an underhive's nervous system with what tools he has. Eye lines, the rhythm of maintenance drones, the way heat settles near bulkhead seams where waste flues run. He plots loops and fallback routes with chalk on the underside of catwalks, then smears the marks clean. In his head, floor after floor blossoms into a wireframe built from steps, drips, and human noise. He doesn't eat. He drinks once, cautiously, from a condensation pipe, letting the water bead off his glove first to see if it kills leather. It doesn't. He listens. Far below, an ocean sloshes. It's not water. It smells like time dissolved into chemicals. Above, a congregation chants in a minor key. The words are different from the ganger's speech, but the rhythm is law. Between the two, industry drones on without sleep. 2 floors down, he makes his first mistake. The catwalk looks intact. It isn't. A span plate gives under his boot, screams a high metal scream. His weight drops 6 inches and then holds. The sound scythes the quiet. The servo skulls swivel as one. He moves before the echo dies, because there's no such thing as stealth after you've announced yourself. He flows through piping like water chooses downhill. When boots and curses flood the stairwell, he's already in darkness thick as velvet under a rusting conveyor. A beam of light rakes overhead, a flashlight or something pretending to be one with more devotion. The beam jitter is fear or stimulant nerves, or both. 3 little red dots join the white beam. The dots are eager, newborn, and hungry. Lass. Directed energy weapons with no discipline behind them. "Diam," someone says. Not a sentence, a diagnosis. He slides a pellet along the conveyor belt with 2 fingers and nudges it off the lip. It drops 5 feet, hits metal, pops. Smoke that isn't smoke, a microdust that glows for a moment, then turns light to syrup. The white beam spreads into a sheet. The red dots bloom and die. He's out and up before they think to fire where he isn't. The smallest of the 3 raises his weapon too high. The barrel kisses a pipe. The pipe hisses. The hiss becomes a scream. For one instant, all 3 are silhouettes inside a halo of steam. He goes through them like a draft through candles. No killing blows. Knuckles to the brachial nerve, heel to the floating ribs, thumb to the mandibular notch where flesh meets metal. The big one's metal jaw resists pain. It doesn't resist leverage. He turns it into a handle and assists its owner into the catwalk rail. The smallest stabs with a knife made from a screwdriver. The strike is earnest and telegraphed. He rotates his torso 45 degrees and gifts the air a fraction of cape to hit. The middle one goes for the trigger, always a gambler's choice. The grapnel line whispers. Catches, yanks. The autogun departs its new owner, in a surprise divorce and clatters into the abyss below with a noise that will tell hungry men which direction not to come from. After, 3 bodies breathing and hating him for letting them. He plucks the icon from the middle one's neck. The double-headed eagle stares back with the infuriating calm of empire. He places it back. Whatever this thing means here, it means too much to take lightly. "Who holds law here?" he asks, softly, in a language none of them should understand. Blank stares. Not language. Faith. He tries again, reshaping the sentence with fewer joints, more bone. "Who judge? Who make kill okay?" The big one spits blood and laughter through split lips. "Arbeit," he says, and the word lands heavy. Then, reverent and scared in the same breath, "Ekli." Kark-ki. Arbeits, ecclesiarchy. He files the syllables into a neat cabinet called "Enemies if I'm careless." He leaves them zip-tied to the rail with lines cut from his own cape's spare edge. He wedges a wrench where they can see it. If they burn the ties rather than pull, the wrench drops between grating slats and knocks their teeth out. A lesson disguised as mercy. He smears ash on a bulkhead and drags 2 fingers through it to leave a mark. Wide arc, narrow arc, points. A bat, yes, but here it acquires a halo. He slashes the halo once. Broken, not wholly. He didn't plan the change. He lets it stand. More hours. He learns the rules without anyone saying them. Machines are prayed to before they're repaired. Doors are locked with both keys and benedictions. Some sections of the hive are warm with people. Others are cold, not because they're empty, but because something affectionate would like them to be that way. He doesn't cross into the cold. Not yet. He finds a market whose ceiling is so low, even the tall have to bow. Men and women trade in bolts, rations, vials of bright fluid that make pupils thin to knives. Children sit in nests of chain and watch him with the same curiosity cats save for thunder. 6 stalls sell icons of the 2-headed bird. One sells little sanctified nails in sachets with handwritten blessings. He buys a packet with a coin he suspects is too round, too clean, too from somewhere else. The seller stares, then nods and adds an extra nail as if to make up for an offense they can both smell but not name. He doesn't eat the protein squares here any more than he'd eat a bullet. He does sit near the crowd long enough to listen to 3 fights, a sermon, and a murder. The murder is fast and bureaucratic. 2 men in armor the color of soot appear, drape the victim's throat over a rail, and make paperwork out of flesh with a tool so ceremonial it takes both hands. The crowd's reaction is a shrug learned over generations. The word tithe surfaces and sinks. He leaves before the blood dries. The smell tries to follow. On the next level, he finds shrines. They bloom in cul-de-sacs and dead ends like fungus where light dies. Some are neat, with candles, polished steel, and inscriptions etched so clean the letters might bleed if cut. Others are rooms of fused wax, ribbons of old smoke asleep on the ceiling, bones arranged in geometry that feels less like art and more like math for the dead. He studies the faces carved in metal, martyrs, generals, a man with a halo made of knives, and everywhere the same bird with 2 heads, 1 eye on heaven, 1 eye on ammunition. He kneels at one shrine, not to pray, but to inspect. The ash on the nearest icon is scented. Sweet, resinous, not purely fuel. He pinches a smear between glove pads. It gums. incense. A smoke with purpose, to perfume, to sanctify, to hide. He files the resin scent next to Auspex interference because he has started to learn their words and his brain insists on filing information properly. He scrapes a fragment of dried parchment from the floor. Stringy fibers, stamped wax seal, sigils like lightning caught mid-letter. The seal has been broken, poorly, and resealed with spit. Someone read something they shouldn't. He pockets the fragment. Late, if late exists here, he climbs. He needs context, horizon line, sky. He gets none. Every ceiling is another floor. Every top is a bottom of something else. The best he can do is find a service spire that rises 3 levels and ends in a maintenance door bolted shut with screws that were whispered to before they were turned. He hangs there in a place wind doesn't remember and looks outward. It is beautiful in the way a fever is beautiful from inside it. The hive is a mountain turned inside out, kilometers of architecture suspended like stalactites from an unseen ceiling. Pipes thicker than train cars swoop and dive. Chimneys belch clouds like weather systems. Bridges thread from spire to spire with a confidence that would be arrogance if not for the fact that anything that had to look down this far would go mad. On one bridge, a procession moves. Robes, candles, a banner that catches the light with a whisper of gold. On a lower level, a slum glows in multicolor, each light a different deal with hunger. He records nothing digitally. Instinct says that the machines here are jealous gods who don't like strangers peeking over their shoulders. He murmurs the map to himself, the way he used to whisper multiplication tables against the noise of a beating. Spire with cracked 5th buttress, 200 meters south by heat shimmer. Bridge with banner, vantage, controlled traffic. Rust river, probably sump overflow, maybe outlet to support beams. The words dry in the air and turn into anchors. He needs a language. He begins to build one. He trades a length of braided line for a child's slate and a stub of chalk. He sits cross-legged near a pipe that screams every 29 seconds and learns Low Gothic from a girl who has never left 3 adjacent levels. She teaches the words for bread, blessing, blackwater, and don't. He learns the stress patterns of authority. She is very clear about which words you never say near the men with soot armor. When he draws a bat on the slate, she grins with knife-bright teeth and says a word that sounds like wraith. He shakes his head. He flips the slate and tries again, adding the broken halo. She doesn't smile this time. She nods, solemn as court. He leaves the slate with her and 3 folded ration tabs he will not use. Night and day exist, but not as sky schedules. They're industrial moods. A horn sounds. The hive shifts. Some corridors go dark, others blaze brighter. Crowds pour along gangways like river water forced through culverts. He moves opposite the flow because there's less resistance there, and because hunters always swim upstream toward origin, not downstream toward consequence. On a platform where 10 pipes meet to argue, he meets a maintenance tech in a robe spattered with oil and holy symbols. The man's breath smells like iron and burned herbs. He calls his wrench spanner and his spanner saint. He refuses to touch Batman's grapnel until he's wrapped 3 fingers around an amulet and whispered to it. When he finally holds the gun, he cradles it as if it might scream. He doesn't understand its manufacture, but he understands that it obeys. That is enough for respect here. Right to wake, the tech says, demonstrating a little ritual made of taps and breaths. Right to sleep. No right, no work. No work. Machine angry. Machine angry. People die. Understand? I understand, he says, and he means it in more ways than the tech will ever know. The first cult he finds doesn't call itself a cult. They never do. He notices purchasing patterns, a stall buying too much incense, too many nails, far more candles than light can explain. He tails the deliveries across 2 levels, through a narrow throat of hallway, where ancient graffiti talks about a saint who burned happily, into a chamber full of broken statues posed like men waiting their turn to confess. The air is hot. The words are wrong, not because of grammar, but because of intent. It's the wrong kind of joy, the manic edge just before a murder. He doesn't crash their gathering. He can't afford a statement. He watches from a rib of steel and times their chanted breaths, notes which lines make shoulders shake. He studies the man at the front, the one whose voice cracks and then doesn't. The leader isn't leading. He's listening. To what? When the chant crescendos, he smells the faintest lightning. Not weather. Not machine. Something in the room has nodded back. He leaves and loops 3 separate routes to a place where a Vox unit lives behind a grilled gate. The Vox doesn't look like any radio he knows. It's a small cathedral full of knobs. He pays a gatekeeper with information. 3 names said in a row, pitched to rhyme the way the gangers do. And the promise that the men who own those names are arranged in inconvenient positions under a catwalk 7 levels down. The gatekeeper touches an icon, says a word that is both password and prayer, and lets him in. He memorizes the operator's sequence, then breaks it in half and throws the halves away. He never uses other people's rituals whole. He listens to the hive's heartbeat. Half of what washes through the Vox is static, shaped like hope. The other half is orders like knuckle bones, hard, tossed, uncaring where they fall. Somewhere, a female voice with a soldier's patience asks for verification in monotone. Somewhere else, a male voice weeps while reading a list of numbers that could be coordinates or obituaries. Between them slithers laughter, recorded or alive, he can't tell. He finds the Arbeits frequency not because it's labeled, but because it's clipped, spare, and obeyed. He drops a bundle. Time, place, head count, the way the leader's cadence shifts just before the sparks in the air. He gives no name. He doesn't mention the broken halo bat. He steps away from the Vox and replaces the gate carefully, returning the exact number of scuffs his boots added to the floor. On his way back to the underhive, he passes a column where someone has etched thousands of tiny lines, each line notched thrice across like tally marks, daring the stone to lose count. A child is adding another. He watches the rhythm. Scratch, 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 cross. The cross is fierce. The child doesn't look at him until she's done. He nods. She nods back as if acknowledging a law of physics. Rumors begin the way they always do, as apologies for fear. A wraith in the service ducts. A penitent angel missing its halo who only answers to deeds. A demon that refuses to kill because it enjoys watching. He feeds none of them. He steps around them like he steps around puddles that might not be water. He paints his mark where only the desperate look. Under rails, on the underside of door lips, at the level of a child's gaze. Not a challenge. A promise. He sleeps once, badly, curled into a V of steel that rings faintly with the city's pulse. In the dream that comes like a thief, he sees Gotham sink beneath this one. An old photograph slid under a newer one and then taped there by necessity. He wakes with his fists clenched and a new ache in his left shoulder where a bolt pressed for hours. He rolls it out, counts silently to stop the shame spiral that comes with pain, and stands. The next cycle, the servo skulls try to follow him. He lets them think they do. He leaves them a corridor to haunt and an echo to love. He moves somewhere they cannot hover. A sewer not made for water, but for steam and the ghosts of burned chemicals. Through the vents, he hears a sermon delivered in a voice made of smoke and wire. It talks about duty like it's a taste that never goes away. It talks about mercy like a thing best practiced on machines. When the congregation answers, their word for yes sounds like boots slammed together. He doesn't know the emperor. He knows cities. This one is a labyrinth built by people who were kinder on their best days than their masters allowed them to be. It can be saved in handfuls, not in wholes. He files the plan under impossible, so we begin, and unpacks his kit to see what pieces of one world can survive in another. Smoke pellets become incense amplifiers, mixed with resin scraped from the shrine floors so that cameras cough and optics sneeze. The batarangs get new skins cut from hive ceramite. Sparks slide off instead of digging in, and they sing a different note when they hit. The grapnel head is wrapped in cloth, fueled with a faint oil he stole from a machine priest's robe. It greases into places a tool has no right to go, and does so without squeal. He tapes a little slip of parchment into the cowl, not because he believes, but because the machines here do, and the suit is a machine when it needs to be. By the time the Arbites find the cult, he's already been there, mapped exits, marked load-bearing columns with a grease mark only a certain angle of light will reveal. He hears the gunfire from 5 levels above. He doesn't join. The line between help and interference is thin here and policed by people who make policy with hammers. He waits until the noise dies and the prayers begin. He moves after, a shadow in a city of them, taking the things no one else cares about. Ledger fragments, a list of deliveries, a pattern of days. He files it all. He will give it back when it will hurt the right people most. And when the underhive finally breathes after a killing night, and the lumen strips flicker in one of their periodic mimicries of dawn, someone on a maintenance ladder looks up and sees a symbol scorched into soot high on a pillar where no human should have reached. A bat. A halo, broken. Beneath it, a second mark. 3 parallel lines, an old detective's habit translated into a new dialect. The worker stares, calls a friend, points. The friend whispers a word that could mean judge or ghost, depending on which tooth you're missing. They say nothing more. They go to work. Inside a city the size of a mountain, a rumor grows bones. Inside a man who has never needed anyone's permission to go to war, a vow finds a shape that fits the 41st millennium and still looks like the one he made as a boy in an alley that no longer exists. Fear used to be a scalpel. Here, it's an altar. In Gotham, terror separated criminals from their confidence, peeled bravado away with a gloved hand. In the hive, fear is tithed by the barrel and burned like incense. It rises in columns, and the warp leans down to sip. He understands this the way he understands roofs and alleys, intuitively, body deep. If terror feeds monsters, then terror must be rationed. Not spectacle. Precision. He starts by timing panic. On his slate, 3 columns. Spark. Surge. Scream. The spark is inevitable. The first glimpse, the cape resolving from steam, a hand materializing behind someone's ear to remove a pistol from the story. The surge is the critical window where crowds decide between stampede and stillness. The scream is the point of irrecoverable attention, when the hive's countless ears swivel and the warp, if it has ears, pricks them too. He marks a hard rule with a blunt line of chalk. 12 seconds. He allows 12 seconds of terror, never 13. The 13th second is for silence. Smoke becomes incense. He crushes resin filched from shrine floors into his pellets, cuts it with powdered ash from sanctified candles, and adds a filament of copper stolen from a machine priest's repair kit. Burned, it behaves like weather with opinions, clinging to optics, turning Auspex readouts into harmless snowfall, making lumen strips flicker with the polite hesitation of a chapel about to dim for prayer. The pellet's scent is a message the hive understands. Not chaos, not riot, ritual. In the stalls, people lower voices when they smell it. In corridors, footfalls soften. In 12 seconds, a crowd's heart rate drops enough that no one screams when the fight ends. He rebuilds the batarangs with hive ceramite skins hammered thin over his familiar cores. Last scatter shrugs off their faces. Magnetics in the grips let him pull them from plasteel walls with a twitch of the wrist. He grooves devotional lines into the flat of each blade, not out of piety, but because the Mechanicus teaches respect through ritual, and machines behave better when they feel tended. When he throws one past a ganger's jaw so it sings against a pipe instead of biting flesh, the sound is surgical, a note that says stop across 5 levels at once. He teaches himself liturgy because camouflage in this place is not only physical. The catechisms are equal parts engineering manual and lullaby. He memorizes 3 by sound alone, so he can mouth along when a maintenance crew pauses to chant before opening a panel. He never leads, he never mocks. He hums a counter melody under his breath that tracks breath rates. The litany finishes, the wrists are calm, the spark surge scream chain never starts. He studies the bureaucracy, its spines and nerves, its sacred forms. In an administratum substation, he watches a hunched scrivener stamp a page, lift the stamp again, whisper to it, and stamp once more just off-center so the seal kisses both paper and table. That offset is a signature. It moves things from waiting to moving. That night, he leaves a stack of cult ledger fragments on that same desk, with no note and a stamp already placed, offset by the width of a confession. The paperwork awakens, confused and obedient. A raid follows 3 days later that he does not attend. Fear, outsourced upward, becomes a memo, not a bonfire. His network grows in the seams where law is too blunt to fit. Sump divers who carry the map of the hive in their scars teach him which pipes sing when you step wrong. In exchange, he teaches them how to memorize a face without staring. Count the ears, then the hands, then the shoes. Hold the image behind your eyes, like a coin you plan to spend later. A scrap priest with grease on his rosary and a voice that rattles like old bolts shows him a reliquary of worn-out fuses. The priest calls them blessed husks and weeps without embarrassment for a generator that died doing its duty. Batman listens without impatience and asks to see the dead part's failure patterns. Together they chart a power dip schedule that opens and closes security doors on its own piety. That schedule turns into corridors of shadow at times of his choosing. The data scrivener is the keystone. He finds the man in a cell made of filing, the walls furred with parchment, his eyes rimmed with ink and sleeplessness. The scrivener's guilt leaks out of him like solvent. He once miscopied a serial. The shipment went to the wrong spire. 27 people died quietly of administrative misplacement. Batman does not absolve. He cannot and would not pretend. But he gives the man a form. Record of irregularity, internal. It is a nothing document in an ocean of them, but binary appended to habit becomes leverage. The scrivener begins filing falsified copies of the cult's own manifests into the cult's own file trees, innocuous and poisonous. When our bites eventually open those trees, the rot looks self-grown. The fear that follows is contained to the guilty office. Rumor management becomes as critical as patrol. He studies the way stories grow legs here. A twitch at a stall becomes a whole parade by the end of the catwalk. He needs a symbol to gather whispers without feeding frenzy. He rejects the soaring projection thrown from rooftops in Gotham. There are no skies here, only ceilings. Instead, he builds a lumen trap, a lens scavenged from a shrine lamp, and a polished scrap of cathedral glass mounted on a rat king of clamps. During shift change, he angles it through smog so that an oval of light falls across the flank of a spire and resolves into the broken halo bat for exactly 30 heartbeats. Not enough time for a crowd, not enough brightness for a spectacle. Enough for the right eyes to see and triangulate. Someone says, "There," into a whisper network he's fostered, and 3 people he trusts go where the light was and find an envelope under a grating with names inside. He never touches the servo skulls. He will not. He knows what human remains mean to this place and won't court the kind of attention that comes from defiling a saint with a screwdriver. Instead, he befriends their keepers. He fixes a keeper's hand with a splint after a fall, the middle finger broken, the kind that never heals right without help, and leaves behind a set of padded gloves cut from his cape's spare panel to make ladder rungs less cruel. In return, the keeper coughs and adjusts a patrol route, so a cluster of skulls drifts clockwise instead of counter. The adjustment creates a blind 30-meter slice of corridor that repeats every 8 hours. He works inside that slice like a craftsman in a vice he himself turned. Cults are cancer, but also cuisine. They eat what the hive kills, and they dine best when the meat is fear. He changes where they shop. He marks their quartermasters with a scent only tools and exhausted men notice. Oil laced with incense that smells like a saint's day gone sour. It's no magic. It just makes sleep taste like guilt. Quartermasters who don't sleep count wrong. Counting wrong in a hive is a crime that punishes itself. He plays with inventory, disappearing a single box of candles here, a spool of copper there, things that don't matter to raids but ruin rituals. He salts thresholds with powdered ferrite so chalk circles pit and crack. He slips unsanctified nails into bags of sanctified ones so the faithful argue and miss a meeting. He never attacks the altar. He empties the pantry and lets hunger do sermons. The first time he tests the 12-second rule under fire, he does it in a room that smells like citrus and insecticide. A dozen gangers stand in a circle around a woman, reading from a page that hisses when her finger passes certain lines. A servo cherub hangs from the ceiling, its flayed wings papered over with verses. The spark. He drops from the duct and snuffs the candles with a floor-length cloak of incense. The surge. Bodies tense, weapons rise. 2 trigger fingers twitch and misfire into smoke instead of flesh. He uses 8 seconds on the biggest man, clavicle, sternum, knee, and spends the 9th on the reader. Book out of hand, page torn, lines scrambled. He throws his voice on the 10th in a tone that sounds like the Arbite's clipped authority. A single word: down. 2 men obey out of habit they hate themselves for. He cuts the cherub loose on 11, so it flaps into faces and ruins aim. 12. Silence. An infrasound hum from a broken voxcaster he tuned to lull rather than rouse, the kind of note that makes shoulders fall. Then exit, his shadow trailing behind, the room full of coughing and no screaming at all. He leaves the book intact but reordered, so the next time they try to read it, the sentences tell them to go home and eat and sleep and forget. He refuses kill shots, even when the hive begs for them. Here, a long heartbeat of terror can metastasize into something with horns. He breaks wrists, not necks. He picks targets that matter: messengers, keepers of schedules, the friend everyone trusts, and leaves their pride intact. A humiliated leader makes speeches. A frightened quartermaster makes mistakes. He applies pressure to vertebrae and economies alike. He practices triage the Imperium would not recognize as mercy. He lets a killer live because killing him will make 20 more. He breaks a truly petty man's ankle because the petty control the doors. During down cycles, he lets fear rest. He stocks caches, a medici kit where only a child could crawl, rations hidden beneath a saint's bas-relief with a note that says "for the smallest hands." He leaves directions in chalk at knee height. He knows that charity is not a rumor that grows legs. It's a rumor that grows spines. People who feel provisioned are harder to stampede. He wants the hive's baseline to be something closer to calm, so when he lights the match of terror, it burns clean and short. He learns the prayers that machines like. The grapnel gets a whispered tap sequence before a shot. 2 knuckles, 1 palm, a breath. The cowl gets a slip of parchment behind its brow plate, inked with a neutral benediction for unfailing function. He doesn't believe the words alter the world, but he's seen enough to know that belief alters behavior, and behavior alters results. The city hums differently when it feels tended. He can use that hum. When Arbite's squads hammer into a block and the noise turns the air to gravel, he resists the urge to join or to countermand. He becomes a rumor running beside their boots. He visits the level below and opens 3 doors by bending latches with a pry bar wrapped in cloth. He moves families through them. He adds a chalk line on a load-bearing column that reads, in the local shorthand he has invented with children, "The night judge forbids fire here." The raid burns hot and brief. The building stands. The Arbites leave thinking their targeting was clean. The district carries a different story. That precision visited and left its sigil. The next time, people don't run as far or as fast. They duck. They wait. They don't trample. 12 seconds are easier to hold. He creates call and response codes with his network that look like piety to anyone listening. A runner lights a candle in a niche, then snuffs it with 2 fingers and relights with 1. Message received. The lumen will be placed. A medici hums the first 4 notes of a hymn. If a scrap priest answers with the 5th, the route is clear. If he answers with silence, you vanish into a stairwell for an hour. He drills them on breath to tempo. He tells the scrivener when to be late on purpose. He teaches the sump divers how to hide a child in a coil of hose so eyes slip past. Fear needs arteries, he tells them without ever using the word fear. We are going to tie tourniquets. Scare tactics become bespoke. To a gun boss who prides himself on never flinching, he provides a private miracle. Every time the man tries to chamber a round, the magazine is empty. Batman has a small magnet on a string and a gift for patience. He leans over a catwalk for an hour, fishing cartridges out of a cargo crate whenever the boss looks away. The man quits the gang to save face he no longer owns. The gang tears itself to define a new hierarchy. No gunfire, no screaming, no ripples in the warp, only a quiet implosion. When he must terrify, he terrifies with intent. He visits a cult that paints smiles on rebreathers long before it earns the attention of an inquisitor. He does not fight them in public. He steals their laughter. He replaces the chorus track they use to keep courage with a nearly identical file that drops a half step precisely when their leader raises his knife. Half steps are how music says mourn. The first time the room hears the note wobble, 5 men cry without knowing why. The leader recoils from the knife because it now looks like a funeral tool, not a sacrament. The ritual collapses. Their fear splashes inward, not outward. No new gods get fed. He learns the taste of corn in the mouth, iron and heat and rhythm that insists. He learns the smell of Slanesh in a corridor, perfume that turns into static. He learns to walk softly past rooms where mathematics has too many teeth. He adds talc to the soles of his boots for those places and lets the sound of his steps be a mercy. Children become his censors because no one thinks to police their roots with the rigor reserved for adults. He never asks them to carry messages. He asks them to remember patterns. How many bells between bells? He says. Which guards look up when they laugh? He puts the broken halo bat at heights a child can draw, within reach, so it belongs to them, and not to a myth from above. When a child tells him, with exacting seriousness, that the night judge is for rules that make the air kinder, he writes it on his slate and underlines it 3 times. Every tool gains a quiet mode. The grapnel cough becomes a breath drawn and held. The cape's edge loses its flourish and gains a seam weighted to fall without flap. The cowl's lenses dim by a fraction that is also the amount pupils widen when light shifts. Faces he meets don't spook. He tapes soft padding over the inside of his gauntlet plates, so strikes don't ring. He builds an apology kit into his belt. A roll of bandage, a few medici tabs, a microcard with a prayer printed on it in clean script. He leaves the card under a pillow in a room where a fight jostled a sleeping child. The prayer is bland and kind, and not his. It belongs to the hive. He borrows it and gives it back better traveled. In the Vox, he becomes a weather report. Mild turbulence expected in the sump walk, a voice says, bureaucratic and bored. Delay non-essential travel by 12 minutes. The sump divers turn right instead of left and miss a patrol. The patrol files a report about low resistance. The report claims success. Success is calm. Calm is no panic. No panic is no meal for things that listen to panic the way sharks listen to blood. He keeps himself on a metronome. His rage, still there, unaged by star travel, wants spectacle. He feeds it work instead. Rope angles, door timings, weight estimates, the mathematics of muscle loss and gain under heavier gravity. He measures how long his presence lingers in a hallway by counting how many breaths it takes for a baby in a sling to stop fussing after he passes. 7 is acceptable. 4 is better. 2 is perfection. Terror becomes a room he visits for exactly 12 seconds at a time, then locks behind him. Precision becomes a kindness he can afford. And in a galaxy that has convinced itself that fear is the only tool that works, he starts to make a small, stubborn case for something else. Not hope, too loud, too bright, but consequence, measured and quiet, that never quite turns into a prayer the warp can hear. They notice him the way a fever notices a pulse, a pattern that won't stop. 3 cults collapse without flames. 2 heretics wake up still breathing, but unable to look at their tools. A shipment of black candles fails to arrive, though the paperwork insists it did, and carries the right seals in the wrong shade of red. The underhive doesn't grow quiet. It redistributes its noise, and the redistribution draws the eye of an organization built to punish anomalies. They come at dawn cycle, when the lumen strips along a main concourse are pretending to be sunlight. First a hush, then a smell of sanctified promethium, then the sound of boots marching in a rhythm too regular for anyone but the Arbites or those with the right to command them. A door that had never opened in living memory unlatches itself because someone with authority said words into a vox. A retinue enters in a column that's also a sermon. Gun serfs with augmetic shoulders, a psyker in a black hood like a candle snuffed with hands, a parchment-sleeved clerk with a face made of mathematics, and at their center, a woman whose stride tells everyone present that her authority is heavier than her body. The rosette hangs at her throat like a small, patient sun. The double-headed eagle stamped on it isn't decoration. It is gravity in metal. She is young for this work, or just efficient enough to have avoided the years that make faces kind or cruel. Her voice is neither. When she speaks low Gothic, the language stands up straighter. When she asks for a precinct captain, people become very interested in their shoes. He watches from a cartilage of catwalk. He notes how her gun serfs never look at their weapons because they don't need to, the way the clerk's ink-stained fingers twitch when citizens breathe too loud, the way the psyker's head tilts as if listening for a song no one else can hear. He could leave and make their search a long, hungry thing. Instead, he decides. Control is not always escape. Sometimes control is choosing the table, the chair, and how the first minute passes. He steps into view the way a shadow comes off a wall when light changes. Gauntlets up, cape low, nothing that looks like a threat if your world thinks threat is only a muzzle or a blade. The gun serfs pivot with a grace that belonged to dancers before someone stapled metal over the dance. The psyker's hood twitches. The clerk touches parchment like it's a weapon. The interrogator raises her hand. Weapons point down by fractions, then obey altogether. Designation, she says, and the word lands like a weight. He doesn't give one. He gives a chain of custody. He names 3 crime scenes and recites what moved where and why. He says the number of candles on an altar that should have had 13 and had 12, because that is how you starve a ritual without bleeding a street. He gives dates, times, and names. He refuses labels. When she asks again, designation, he answers with a question dressed as a courtesy. Are you Ordo Hereticus, he says, or a rumor about it? She doesn't smile. Good. She is not here to share ownership of jokes. They talk where the hive can hear them, because neither wants to be accused later of hiding anything that should have been said under lumen. The clerk takes notes by scratching lines into a data slate with a stylus of bone. The psyker drifts closer and stops a precise meter away, as if an unseen circle around the cowl forbids further trespass. "Hereticus," she says. "Interrogator Damaris Kest, by writ of Inquisitor Severian K. Varn. You have disrupted ongoing investigations." "Investigations," he says, "that were about to become purges." The word makes the clerk flinch like paper cut. The Arbeit's captain present, arrived with his own aura of inevitability, looks relieved and offended at the same time. "Purges are efficient," the clerk murmurs. "Purges are lazy," he replies, not to insult, but because truth and courage sound the same and travel better together. Precision is faster when you want the parasite, not the host. Her gaze measures responses the way a scale is interested only in mass. She doesn't disagree. She changes the angle. "What are you?" Kest asks, "and to whom do you bend the knee?" "A man," he says. "To no one." Then, because honesty without context is just arrogance repackaged, "I bend to outcomes. If your oath and mine can share a street, we can talk." She steps closer, and the rosette swings, catching Lumen and throwing a small, mean sunspot against his chest. Up close, she smells like well-cared-for leather and paper that has seen fire without burning. Up close, he can see where her glove has been repaired with a stitch so neat it should have been a machine's work, except a machine would have made it sterile. This is human, precise, stubborn. "Your toys," she says, turning her head a fraction toward a tech priest who had quietly arrived from nowhere, hands full of mechadendrites and expectations. "They offend." The priest croaks a rite. It could be blessing or accusation. Lenses rack focus on the grapnel. The mechadendrites twitch with acquisitive liturgy. The priest wants to take pieces away and lay them on cold altars to be named and owned. "They function," he says. "They obey. They are maintained with respect." "Respect is not the same as orthodoxy," the priest intones, organic voice barely a ghost under the metallic. He recites without irony, and without any sense that the words will change him. 3 lines from a machine prayer he learned for exactly this moment. He touches the grapnel housing in the tap pattern the maintenance tech taught him, and speaks the low Gothic syllables that mean nothing to him and everything to gear that hates indifference. The mechadendrites pause because even sacred theft hesitates in the presence of correct procedure. The interrogator doesn't hide the way her eyes sharpen. Ritual fluency is a language of loyalty here. He has spoken it. They take him anyway, but not in chains. Into a precinct chapel whose statues are blunt with use and where the air tastes like ash someone cares for. A rosette on the wall glows dull red, either from internal power or because the metal itself remembers being heated in old arguments. She interviews him across a table that has seen elbows from orphans and warriors alike. She begins with questions that are nets: birthplace, home, allegiance, known enemies. He answers with weather, city names that don't exist on any star chart here, and an allegiance to process that is both unhelpful and the bedrock of his life. She shifts to questions that are burins. How do you sleep? He thinks about refusing by silence, then chooses a thinner honesty. Badly, on purpose. The psyker hovers at the edge of the room. He can feel the psychic's attention like a draft that doesn't cool skin, only memory. The hood turns toward him, and a voice like a wire stretched too tight slides into the room without using air. "He is not a psyker," the hood says, words carefully placed to avoid becoming a verdict. He is tidy. Tidy, the clerk echoes with contempt. We are drafting a classification for a broom. Tidy minds shed fewer echoes, the psyker says without heat. Fewer things listen when he thinks. They perform tests that are not torture and would be if controlled by other hands. Holy water, or an approximation thereof, on his tongue. A relic pressed against the cowl, a rough splinter in a glass capsule, or a nail that might have been hammered into a saint, or a saint's memory of a nail. A servo skull whispers scripture into his ear until the cadence, familiar because all liturgies share a frame, begins to sit on his nerves like a weight. He breathes through it. He does not make the mistake of closing his eyes. They do not find corruption. They do not find compliance either. That frustrates the clerk, intrigues the interrogator, and calms the psyker, who has the look of a man relieved to find a hallway without drafts. She changes tactics again, to work. She has a case file, a heretic cell, probable warp contagion, an administratum node too efficient to be real, evidence enough to justify a raid, not enough to justify the raid she wants, the kind that saves more than it salts. Show me, she says. He expects a trap. He moves through it anyway, because the only way out of good traps is through. And because being used intelligently is not the worst fate here. He asks for a day and a room with walls he can draw on. She gives him 3 hours and a corridor with a chalkboard that doubles as a confessional schedule. He smiles into the cowl. Time pressure is a better test than candles and vials. He builds chains. He pins parchment copies and charcoal rubbings and the clerk's own clean notes to the board with wax drips and a carpenter's stubbornness. He sketch maps traffic lines in the hive with chalk, the lines thickening where the clerk's ledgers thicken and thinning where they go coy. He circles the wrong seal red beside the right seal red. He underlines purchase orders for mundane items that, when totaled, place too much weight on a support pillar 3 levels down, a delivery route disguised as gravity. He draws a triangle that looks like prayer geometry and writes supply, sanctuary, song at its points. He leaves song last and says, "You don't have it yet, because you haven't listened where the hive is loudest." They bristle. He earns it. He points to vent stacks. He points to the market of relic fuses. He points to a place where the hymn changes key, and the only reason you would change a hymn's key is if you didn't want anyone to sing along. An Arbite's captain watches in tight-lipped disapproval that isn't disdain. Soldiers learn to hate being told their hammer is a hammer and the world 1,000 nails. He speaks to the captain directly. "I'm not taking your raid. I'm changing its first door. The rest of the doors are yours." They deploy at shift bell when Rote keeps the most men in predictable places. He moves outside the column, because that's how you keep columns from breaking under their own mass. He puts 2 batarangs into pipes at waist level, 3 levels over the target room, so steam falls like a curtain that only a fool fires through. He leaves an incense pellet in a vent, so Auspex reads a saint's day, not a fight. The Arbites stack at the wrong door the heretics want, and at the last second, the interrogator flicks 2 fingers. The column pivots, perfectly drilled obedience, to a maintenance hatch 4 meters left that opens into the quartermaster's office instead of the prayer floor. They hit the spine, not the rib. No glorious stand. No gods called. A man who keeps lists tries to swallow one and chokes on margins. The psyker hums a sour note that turns people's courage into paperwork. 2 gun serfs remove hands from levers that shouldn't be touched, with the gentleness of morticians who respect even the dead they hate. The interrogator watches from the center, rosette dull, expression a ledger that only totals when the room is finished. Later, in the precinct chapel, the clerk admits casualty projections were off, in his favor. 72% fewer unplanned fatalities than average, the clerk says, pinching his nose like the math hurts to speak. Collateral reduction unacceptable only to those who equate fire with virtue. Which is many, Kest says wryly. He doesn't push. He does not push the Imperium. He holds up what results look like when you starve a summons instead of applauding it. Negotiation is like disarming tripwires with your eyes closed. You feel tug, you relax into slack, you choose which line you can afford to cut. She outlines a reality he already understood the minute he saw how this hive breathes. The Inquisition will tolerate anomalies if they allocate fewer resources, cause fewer headaches, and can be blamed cleanly when things sour. She wants his cooperation, not his conscience. He wants jurisdiction at the scale where his methods do not break. A block, a spire, a ritual in a broom closet that would have become a war if someone hadn't turned a page upside down. "What do you want?" she asks, finally leaving the stage of power and walking onto the floor of commerce. "Latitude," he says. "A map of your lines so I don't cross them by accident. A quartermaster who won't steal when I requisition bandages for the wrong people. A Vox channel that listens when I have names. In return, outcomes that make your superiors less interested in this hive. And lives." "Lives you intend to spare," the clerk says, failing again to make scorn sound like strength. "Lives I intend to spend slowly," he corrects. "You can't audit that in a ledger. You can watch districts, stop trying to kill themselves and call it piety if you need to. The Mechanicus wants his suit. The tech priest speaks in machine code and contempt. The words march together well. Uncatalogued pattern, unritualized mechanism. Submit for disassembly, sanctification, reissuance." He places schematics on the table. Not lies, not entirely. The circuitry is true enough. The alloys listed are close enough in behavior to pass the sniff of a nose that has inhaled promethium for decades. He leaves out the part that matters, the way he uses them. The litany they obey is not in the machine, it is in his hands. The priest examines the pages, runs a thumb of steel over a drawing of a pulley, and says a prayer whose subtext is suspicion. "Rite of pure function," the priest murmurs, and taps the grapnel in the right places with 2 knuckles and a breath. The tool responds. Machines are big on manners. The priest relents, not because he's satisfied, but because the device listened when spoken to correctly. Orthodoxy for tonight is behavior, not design. The psyker asks for a different vow. "If you encounter what listens on the other side of screams," the hood says, not looking at him but at some middle distance where all the worst things live. "You will say so into the channel, even if you think it will make something panic." I am not asking. I am keeping a map in my head, and I cannot draw if I do not know where the edges bleed. He nods. There are vows he can make without lying. The interrogator writes a writ in iron ink. The words are heavy where they need to be, and vague where weight would break the paper. It is not a license. It is a leash that both keeps wolves off and attaches a hand to his collar. High Gothic curls through low. The clerk insists on adding a line that reads like a threat and is instead a protection. Subject to recall and questioning at needs defined by the Ordo Hereticus. It gives anyone who wants to shout a place to pour their shouting. He can live with shouting. She seals it with a rosette, pressed so hot the wax hisses like a heresy confessing. Then she does something strange and simple. She takes a brand from the chapel brazier, its handle a piece of brass polished by decades of decision, and she burns a mark onto the inner rim of his cowl, where only he will ever see it. The smell of scorched composite and waxed leather folds into the chapel like a new hymn. The mark is a tiny aquila, one head turned not to heaven, but to street level. Under it, 3 letters in high Gothic, hand-cut. A U-Auxilia Umbra, she names it. Shadow aid. So our channels know your voice, she says. So when you say, open this door now, the door opens. So when someone desperate pulls you out of the dark bleeding and asks if you are with us, you can show them something that is not a story. The brand cools. He lets the heat live in the cowl. He will not remove it. A precedent is a tool, too. She gives him a vox code that sounds like a cough from a sick god. He memorizes it by thinking of it as stairs. 4 steps up, 1 back, a landing, then the mirror of the first 5. The psyker watches him memorize and tilts his hood as if filing away the shape of someone else's discipline for later admiration. They test the channel. He says, Kest. She says, asset. Neither uses names after that. They exchange protocols. He refuses to promise reports on a schedule. He promises a report when a choice exists between a small wound now and a large wound later. She accepts because she has met men who love schedules and learned which wounds they cause. Her retinue shifts at the edges. The Arbeit's captain has questions he won't ask. The clerk polishes his stylus and thinks up new forms to control something wild by trapping it between fields marked signature. The tech priest offers a machine write for a device he will never touch. The psyker hums an interval that makes the candle flames steady. Do you intend to remain? She asks, a question with more blades than words. For now, he says, because this is a place where forever is blasphemy and today is courage, and because the project of making fear smaller in a world that worships it is a long one measured in 12-second segments and chalk. On his way out, he passes a side room where Arbeits drill recruits on the catechism of pursuit. On the wall, someone has strung holy string between nails and parchment to diagram a crime in the only way they can admit thought in public. He stops. He moves 2 strings, ties a new node, and with a piece of charcoal writes under it, means before motive. Motive last because it lies. The Arbeits sergeant in charge grunts as if he tasted something not entirely bad. Later, that sergeant will teach his rookies to build iconostases of cause and effect, and no one will remember exactly where the idea came from, only that it works and pleases machines. Before he leaves the precinct, a child in a too large Arbeits cap, someone's son, someone's ward, someone destined for a uniform unless hunger chooses sooner, stares up at him and says, "Are you the judge who hides?" He points to the inner rim of his cowl as if to scratch it. The child sees the tiny aquila. The child breathes out like a prayer and not at all like a scream. On the Vox later, an hour after he has returned to metal ribs and dark ladders, the channel coughs. "Asset," Kest says. "Report." He gives her 3 names and 1 building that will not stand if a single candle is lit tonight. He does not ask for permission. She does not give it. She says, "Understood," in a tone that means the doors he needs will open 5 seconds before his hands reach them. The hive remains itself, a city that thinks piety is geometry, and geometry is destiny. He remains himself, a man who refuses to let outcomes be accidents. The writ in his cowl is not a conversion. It is a password, a truce, a map edge. He can work with maps. Word spreads in the upper levels that the Inquisition has sanctioned a demon. Word spreads in the lower that the Arbites are taking bribes from a ghost. Word spreads among the men who wear parchment like armor that an anomaly has been domesticated. None of it is true, and all of it is useful. On a hidden maintenance door, he burns a small symbol with a piece of wire heated in a pipe flame. The bat, the broken halo. Beneath it, smaller than breath, a U. In a corner office 3 hives away, an old inquisitor whose name tastes like iron reads an unlovely report about casualty reduction and writes "tolerate until impossible" in neat high Gothic beside the margin. In a shrine where melted candles have shaped themselves into a geology of grief, a machine priest whispers a grudging litany for a grapnel that obeys liturgies it was never designed to know. In the underhive, a rumor grows that when fear doesn't pay, the night judge spends coin nobody else seems to carry. He keeps moving because a sanction is not a stop. He tests the brand on the cowl against cooled metal and finds it scratches paint as easily as any hard edge. He uses it once, lightly, to score a mark on a rail that tells a sump diver which way to run next time someone shouts the wrong word in the right corridor. He speaks into the vox when the song changes key. He does not kill when killing would be theater. He recruits without calling it that, trains by suggestion, writes doctrine in chalk, then wipes it away so the city thinks it taught itself. And when he and Kest meet again, because they will, because the moment you draw a map you plan another route, neither will pretend to have converted the other. They will exchange names that are not names and results that are not miracles. And for a brief moment in a place built to claim that mercy is inefficiency, they will prove arithmetic wrong. It starts with a giggle that isn't a sound so much as a pressure, like a thumb pressed against the soft of the brain. Men in the market freeze, smiles cracking open on faces that didn't plan them. A scrap priest fumbles a benediction and laughs on the wrong syllable. His voice breaks and blood beads in his nose. Somewhere, a child laughs back because children mirror what they hear, and then doesn't stop. He tracks it by the physics it breaks. Sound should fade with distance. This one accrues converts. Laughter sticks to lumen housings, drips off railings, nests in corners like vermin. He stands in a stairwell and listens to it climb steps it doesn't have feet for. The laugh has harmonics that tickle the warp. Too sweet, then metallic. Too playful, then surgical. This is not madness singing to itself. This is infrastructure. He dissects the mirth. Spark, surge, scream, but inverted. Spark, a chime hidden in public address systems that shifts a hymn half a step sharp and turns joy feral. Surge, a chorus layer spliced into jurisdictional vox channels so directives carry a grin you can't unhear. Scream, a crescendo that will become a knife through reality if the city laughs in the same key at the same time. The cults wearing rebreather smiles are conductors, not audience. Their joke is a bridge. Their punchline is a door. He asks Kest for a peace he cannot build. Quiet. She returns him silence in a tin. Not much. A dampener coil meant for transport with a Culexus operative, cracked, half dead, its reliquary seals broken and then resealed hurriedly by a hand that did not want to admit it to inventory. Wrapped in lead scripture and fear, it hums in a register human ears mark absence. He straps it into a spare compartment in his belt, nests it alongside the incense baffles he has learned to trust, and prays to nothing that it will keep things hungry from smelling him when the joke tries to eat the room. The nails he buys from the relic seller are supposed to pin confessions to altars. He learns another use. He files their tips to a geometry the shrine candles taught him and taps them into thresholds with a hammer wrapped in cloth to keep the rites polite. He inks them with ash and rust so they look old. Where he cannot nail, he runs copper wire like rosary string and whispers the machine prayer to rings and turnbuckles. He is not a believer. He is fluent. The warband reveals itself by the choreography of its cruelty. Bodies arranged in spirals, mouths cut to share a punctuation mark. Voxcasters stolen from shrines and wired with ribbon cut from choir vestments. In one room, a smile stamped over a saint's face. In another, a saint's face stamped into a man. Their magus writes jokes on parchment in blood and then reads them backward until they scan as liturgy. He filters grief into data. He counts the beats between giggles. He doesn't attack the cathedral they made out of a factory floor. He attacks their soundtrack. Step 1 is theft. 10 seconds spliced into the Vox hymn cycle, where there used to be 8. He hacks nothing. He trains the scrivener to fill in a form the clerk will file without reading, which moves an imaginary maintenance window into the space where the cult thinks it is invisible. When the chorus swells at shift bell, the hymn trips. Not much. Just enough misstep that a body's instinct to laugh aborts into a cough. A cough is a boundary. Boundaries starve doors. Step 2 is maze. Sanctified maintenance tunnels run under the ritual floor like veins. He chalks arrows in Mechanicus shorthand that is almost correct, correct enough to reassure, wrong enough to lead a pursuer where he needs them. He adds incense pellets to vents that only trigger for 4 minutes when heat hits a certain mark. The exact 4 minutes the magus always uses for his climax. Auspex sees fog. Faithful nostrils smell feast. The warband follows its own hunger into the narrow. Step 3 is the joke's spine. The chorus engine sits on a cart welded from prayer stands, wired to a bank of cracked skulls that still remember the idea of laughter. He could smash it. He does not. Smash the engine, and the room screams. The scream feeds what wants to be born. Instead, he kneels, the genuflection of a penitent, the crouch of a mechanic, and he changes a single goal so that the feedback loop points inward. When the room laughs, the engine will laugh at itself. It is an ugly thing to make a system self-conscious. It is effective. They begin. The choir's first notes stroke the hive, and the hive responds like a body that has been taught what to do when touched that way. He follows a corridor where wires sag, past a niche where melted candle wax has learned topography. In his ear, the coil hums. In his throat, he counts. Spark. 1, surge. 2, 3, 4. Scream. Incoming. Wove. He flips the coil to bleed. 6. Silence, like snow falling in a sound check room. The laughter hits it and skids. He feels the Magus try to drag the room back into mirth through will and pitch, and a blade dipping into someone's skin in the front row. The room obeys, and then notices that it is listening. The warband wears smiles painted on their rebreathers. He steals them. He throws a light, not bright, just clear, to show them their own faces reflected in the glass of a stripped control panel. The smile becomes an emblem, then a question mark, then a smear. A man reaches to wipe his own mask and leaves a streak like a tear. The laugh condenses into an empty space the coil adores. The warp, expecting sugar, gets dust. It sulks in a corner and scratches at the wallpaper instead of tearing through. He moves when the room is thinking, because thoughts take oxygen. He is the opposite of oxygen. The biggest of them, the kind who believes in nothing but the inevitability of his step, charges, machete high, grin painted to the ears. He steps inside, turns the elbow, lets the machete find a pillar that remembers load-bearing and chooses to forgive. On the upswing, he taps the man's mask valve and closes it. The man laughs on the inhale and realizes he has no exhale. He falls into a prayer position he does not know. Live. Lesson. The reader of punchlines, their magus, holds a book whose pages are stitched skin and whose ink shines like oil-thin rainbows. The man's eyes are wrong, too delighted to have ever seen anything worth crying for. He tries to speak a line that will make everyone's lungs bloom into laughter like disease. The coil eats it. The room stares at him, bereft of the sugar high it was promised. He is suddenly only a man with a book whose margins crawl with flies. He does not kill him. He marks him. A small brand cut from a rail and heated in a pilgrim candle stains a shape into the Magus's wrist, a broken halo around a bat. The pain is plain. The meaning arrives later when the interrogator's men come, when the Magus tries to turn his surrender into spectacle, when Kest looks down and sees the brand and issues a calm order no one expected. Bind. Do not behead. There is more theater in testimony than in fire, and I am bored of theater. The warband scatters through the sanctified maze that is sanctified only if you walk it the right way. He tied the pathways to breath earlier. He tied breath to fear. He tied fear to the coil. They reach doors that were open when they rehearsed, and find them closed by nails dark with age. Nails in wood are one thing. Nails in rules are another. The rules hold. He shepherds the last of them through a set of maintenance ribs that intersect like a rosary and into an Arbite's perimeter that has been taught, patiently and recently, how to take men alive without turning alive men into future wars. After, the hive's laughter comes back to itself like a drunk blinking into a basin of cold water. The giggle bleeds out of lumen housings. A child somewhere stops laughing. In the quiet that follows, he hears the city's normal noises with an intimacy that feels like a thank you. Kest steps through the debris, not like a victor, like a bookkeeper who has come to make the ledger earn its ink. She looks at the chorus engine, fingers hovering inches over a cable or two. He nods at the cable he moved, but does not tell her how much he enjoyed moving it. She sees the brand on the Magus's wrist. She notices the lack of bodies. She understands an argument she can take to her superiors that requires no poetry and very little courage. We can do more with less fire if the fire knows when not to laugh. He does not expect gratitude. He does not get it. He gets a report in his channel 2 cycles later with a number. Projected warp incursion reduced by 81% over modeled outcomes. Casualties below administrative threshold. Heretic conduit identified. Testimony. Scheduled. Bureaucracy, when it approves of you, sounds like boredom. He prefers it. Boredom is stable. The consequences radiate the way heat does, touching faces he will never learn, altering schedules he will never read. A street preacher removes the giggle from his voice. A woman who lost someone to joy that felt compulsory decides she can sleep without tying string around her wrists tonight. A Vox operator finds a giggle track buried inside a hymn and deletes it with shaking fingers, then writes a form asking permission to delete it and files the form and stamps it, offset by the width of a confession, so the deletion is real even in the eyes of whatever watches deletions. Raven Guard scouts bivouacked in a sub-spire hear about a mortal who made an entire block fall silent on purpose and mutter myths around bad recaf. An Arbite's precinct hangs a tiny bat-wing sigil cut into parchment behind the Aquila on their wall, where only those who kneel to clean the floor can see it. The Mechanicus writes a grudging addendum to a prayer that admits, never aloud, that devices might respond to discipline that is not embossed with the proper stamp. He turns his attention to the arithmetic of 1. If there is to be a crusade, it will not be declared. It will not have banners or a banner lord. It will have roots. He builds night cells, because an idea must wear a shape to travel without him. 3 people per cell, always 3, because 2 quarrel and 4 gossip. A Medici who will treat a heretic's child first because children do not sin, they inherit. A scrivener who can make forms disappear by completing them exquisitely. A runner who knows which ladders groan and which stairs forget feet. They receive no symbols, only errands. They carry no oaths, only habits. They are taught a few laws, means before motive. 12 seconds, never 13. Close doors politely but firmly. Leave food where a child can find it without asking. Tell the truth to those who can survive it. Training looks like coincidences engineered to teach. He happens to pass a Medici kiosk the same night the ration riot arrives. He does not stop the riot. He stops the rumor that started it by catching the runner and showing him the ledger error with a pencil upside down so it cannot write, only point. The runner unwrites his rumor out of shame, then applies to be part of something he cannot name. He sifts him for malice and finds only hunger. The cell grows. He refuses command. Command would make him visible, and visible men attract sermons and knives. He visits, offers interventions, and leaves behind tools instead of titles. A block that used to panic picks up 3 rules and becomes hard to stampede. A spire that used to burn turns its fire inward, kitchens lit later, bonfires doused earlier. A shrine maiden finds her prayer line trimmed by a man who says we save candles by saving nights. She argues, then agrees because argument takes oxygen, and oxygen is precious underground. Kest offers him a kill team, not because she loves him, because she loves results. They can be loaned, she says, like a relic, a squad that shoots straight and asks permission second. He declines the loan. He borrows them for an evening instead, and teaches them a drill the Arbite's sergeant will later call the quiet pivot. They practice hitting the second door instead of the first, until their bodies know to look where maps don't. He leaves them with a chalked mantra on the wall. Turn left when anger says right. The next raid breaks a spine without breaking ribs. On a narrow bridge between spires, a sump vapor fog rolls in, so cunning it ought to be charging rent. He meets a pilgrim procession wearing chains that are promises, not punishments. He kneels as they pass, not for their god, but for their arithmetic. They carry heavy things without dropping them. A child in the procession reaches to touch the broken halo bat stitched inside his cloak, where only small hands can find it. He lets her. A rumor later says the night judge blessed a chain. Fine. Chains become safer when watched. He interferes in economies small enough to hold in palm. A gang taxes a water valve. He moves the valve's handle to the opposite side of a fence nobody noticed. The tax dissolves into confusion. Confusion dissolves into boredom. Boredom dissolves into jobs. The man who collected the tax goes looking for another revenue stream and finds a scrap-buying stall where he is paid fairly and learns what fairness tastes like. It tastes awkward and delicious. He tells two friends. Crime does not stop. It leans. He measures success by rituals that never happen. He tags walls at child height with chalk that says, "Home," in pictographic shorthand only a few dozen know. Those doors hold. He leaves a symbol under a bridge where voices used to jump. The symbol is a line with a knot halfway, the reminder to knot ropes, to tie on, to give yourself permission to live. 3 jumps don't. He makes enemies. Not of the cultists, they are too busy recalibrating their appetites, but of men whose authority depends on monotony. A quartermaster who loves that forms ruin lives writes a complaint. An officious priest writes a sermon titled The Danger of Precision. A noble somewhere above the smog decides the underhive is too quiet to be healthy. He can't fight sermons with fists. He fights them with tests. He arranges for the sermon priest to be present where fire used to be inevitable. The priest has written that mercy is rot. He lets the priest watch a rot that ends with children not trampled and an Arbeits captain not congratulating himself on a perfect circle of corpses. The priest preaches next week about stewardship. The noble above stops hearing quiet as threat only when tax revenues remain stable. He can tolerate anything that doesn't threaten his coins. He does not deserve that tolerance. He gets it anyway because the hive is not ready for war with above, and Batman is not here for war with above. Yet. Raven Guard make a pass through the smog like shadows who learned humility in a monastery. Built in a storm cloud, one leaves behind a strip of raven black cloth under a bolt by accident or design. He finds it, weighs it, leaves it where it was. The myth is mutual, a mortal who moves like shadow. Shadows who move like mortals. Myths do not sign each other's books. They nod when paths cross. He spends 2 nights teaching a kill team to breathe like thieves instead of penitents. They hate it and love him for it. He shows them that fear can be a vector you push men along, not a lake you drown them in. He shows them the 12-second rule and makes them recite it until they roll their eyes behind visors. The first time they use it without him, they send him a number over the vox as if it were a catechism answer. 12. He sends back 2, meaning breaths a baby took to stop crying when they passed her door. They don't ask how he knows. They start counting too. An earthquake of machinery shivers a district. Not tectonic, maintenance neglect. The hive coughs bolts, a walkway groans. He is on it when the world tries to forget support beams. The choice presents itself in 2 frames and no words. Leap to safety and leave a cluster of workers to die as the walkway shears, or stay and try a math that has killed larger men. He throws the grapnel not to another beam, but to a moving crane. The cape catches on a jag. He cuts it without ceremony. The crane swings like a pendulum in prayer. The cord bites his waist with a kleptomaniac's joy. He is a hinge long enough to give 8 people a chance to choose not to fall. They do. A 9th does not. His hand closes on a sleeve. The sleeve tears. He remembers the face forever. He finds the 9th's family later and places coins on a table in a kitchen that smells like boiled grain and patience. He says nothing. He is forgiven nothing. The hive keeps him anyway. A precinct replaces a purge line in their doctrine with a paragraph about precision under smoke. The paragraph references no one. It quotes no saint. It is introduced after a drill with a bored tone. It will save 1,000 nameless over a decade. He takes his satisfaction in the way candles burn slower that week, how the air tastes faintly less like old fire. He starts writing little books that are not books. Palm-sized cuds with diagrams of vents that always lead somewhere safer than the hall they feed. Lists of doors that open outward rather than in. 6 low Gothic phrases that disarm men who want titles from you. He leaves the cards in toolboxes, under prayer mats, in the gaps between steps where a careful foot would feel them. People find them and swear they were there for years, and the hive had been trying to tell them this the whole time. Kest meets him in the semi-dark of a decommissioned cogitator room that still clicks to itself out of habit. "You're building doctrine," she says, cautious as if complimenting a weapon she might have to confiscate later. "I'm building habits," he says. "Doctrine writes itself when habits succeed." "I could promote you," she says, "to see if the bribe lands." "You could make me conspicuous," he says, and that lands for both of them as the same thing. She tells him about a rival who thinks the answer to all contingencies is to burn air. He tells her about a child who knows where the air moves because she sleeps under a vent. They trade maps neither can file. She lets him read a redacted scrap from a faraway war where men like him died trying to hold doors. Physics insisted on opening. He lets her hold his coil, the tin of silence, and watch her face when the room forgets to hum for 1 second. She hates it and passes it back carefully. "Keep your toys," she says. "Keep your results." Sometimes the cells fail. A runner misjudges a patrol and brings Arbites to a door that hides fugitives. The fugitives don't die. They learn to run quieter. The runner loses 2 teeth and gains a resolve that looks like wisdom from a distance. A scrivener forges too neatly and gets promoted. The promotion kills his access and makes him safer in a way that feels like exile. He takes to drinking tea alone and filing forms with uncharacteristic compassion. Not ideal. Acceptable. A Medicae saves a boy the hive would prefer dead. The boy grows up loyal to the wrong lesson for a while and corrects course when someone he loves notices the line shaped like a knot. Progress isn't a graph. It's graffiti and repairs and nights where no one writes new names on walls. He keeps the symbol the size of a hand. He never lets it grow larger than an invitation. A vigilantism that seeks applause becomes a party. A party becomes a riot with better music. He is not throwing parties. He is laying traps for consequences. At the edge of a sump lake that moves like a planet's slow thought, he meets a woman who calls herself a saint of small water, and a man who calls himself a saint of turning screws. He approves of their heresies. He gives them a route to carry buckets without crossing a course where Arbite's feet drum law. They call that gift a miracle. It is not one. Miracles do not require chalk. In a hall that hosts administrative sin and weddings with equal ease, he stands at the back and watches two people promise absurd things to each other under a guttering lumen strip. He wonders if vows sound different here. He decides they don't. After the ceremony, he leaves a coil of rope and a small printed card in the pocket of the groom's coat. The card says, "Tie the ladder before you climb." The groom never knows where it came from. He ties the ladder. He lives long enough to grow old. Someone will credit the emperor. He credits the knot. He refuses 3 requests for him to visit an upper spire, because that is where sermons live, and he has no interest in being turned into one. Still, his work climbs without him. A noble steward stops a purge when numbers don't justify it, because someone in his office has a palm-sized card with an equation that says, if less than X, then wait. The steward calls it prudence. It is arithmetic disguised as prayer. It travels better than faces. The Vox coughs more often now. "Asset," Kest says when dawn shifts the hive to its daydream. He answers with times, doors, and distances, language both of them are comfortable letting other ears hear, should they be listening. She occasionally answers with a single word, approved. More often, she says nothing at all, and the silence means permission. By tradition, neither of them had to write. He teaches a child the 12-second rule with a skipping rhyme that sounds like nonsense. She teaches 3 other children. He watches them skip and count in a corridor, while men with guns step around them and remember their own mothers and forget to shout. He tells himself that if he ever finds a way back to any sky he remembers, he will still count to 12 before he does anything that frightens someone who doesn't deserve it. Crime continues. Heresy evolves. The warp presses its ear to walls he has chalked and listens anyway. He is not here to win. He is here to fix a variable in an equation this galaxy refuses to balance. He sleeps badly, on purpose. He wakes with the imprint of bolts in his shoulder and a schedule in his head that respects both prayers and payments. He eats when he remembers. He drinks from pipes that have learned to clean themselves when thanked. At the end of a long cycle, in a cul-de-sac of fused wax and handprints, an old woman with a voice like road dust tells him a story about a time before everything was a war. He does not believe her. He wants to. He leaves her with extra candles. She doesn't thank him. She lights one and says a name he doesn't know. The room understands the name. He waits outside until the flame steadies and then moves on. Above him, somewhere beyond smog and duct and miles of habit, ships cross a night no prayer can reach. Below him, a man chooses not to steal because the ledger in his pocket is full of clean lines. Around him, the hive continues its catechism. Work, worship, worry. He is a heresy of method moving through it. He intends to spread. He will not be a Primarch, a saint, a demon, or a department. He will be what he always is when the city presents him with a problem it swears only the loud can solve. Quiet, consequence, a shadow that teaches walls to hold. The crusade is not declared, it is practiced. 12 seconds at a time. In a universe that insists only war is real, he answers with consequence. Not a Primarch, not a saint, just a man in a cowl stamped with a borrowed writ, counting to 12 where everyone else counts bodies. A rumor that walks like discipline. A broken halo bat chalked at child height. Doors that open 5 seconds early because someone asked in the right voice. A hive that still hums, but a little softer around the edges where fear used to feed. He won't save the Imperium. He'll save a shift, a stairwell, a name no ledger would have recorded. He'll keep the coil of silence close and the vow closer. Move the second door instead of the first, and leave tools where miracles are supposed to go. Somewhere, an Arbite's captain drills precision under smoke. Somewhere, a scrap priest adds an unapproved line to a machine prayer. Somewhere, a kid ties the ladder because a small card said to, and grows old on purpose. When the hymn changes key, he'll be there in the maintenance dark, listening for the laugh that isn't, the scream that tries to be, the choices that still can. 12 seconds, never 13. Then gone, like a rumor that doesn't care who tells it next. If you want more of this story, tell me where he should move his shadow. Orcs in the sump, Genestealers in the vents, or a chaos warband that won't stop smiling? And does the Inquisitor keep tolerating the Night Judge, or decide to hunt him? Drop your pick below, and if you want to return to the far future with me, light the lumen and subscribe. In the grim darkness ahead, someone still counts to 12.